Welcome back, dear listener. Tonight, we're exploring the complete story of Chica the Chicken, the hungry performer, whose cheerful exterior and constant companion, Mr. Cupcake, hide one of the most tragic tales in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. From her origins as the backup singer of Freddy's band to her various incarnations across decades of horror, Chica's journey represents the corruption of nurturing instincts into something far more sinister. We'll trace every version of Chica through the timeline: classic Chica with her "Let's Eat" bib, Toy Chica's unsettling transformation, withered Chica's deteriorated form, nightmare Chica's teeth-filled maw, Funtime Chica's brief existence, Rockstar Chica's maraca-shaking revival, and finally, Glamrock Chica's fitness-obsessed tragedy. Each iteration tells a different chapter of possession, hunger, and the twisted fate of Susie, the little girl whose soul became forever bound to the yellow chicken. So settle into your blankets, let the day's worries fade, and allow this story of a character who was meant to represent the joy of eating but became a symbol of insatiable hunger, guide you toward rest. The kitchen noises you might imagine are just your house settling. The footsteps you might hear are merely dreams beginning to form. Feel free to leave a like if these chronicles help you find sleep, and share in the comments what draws you to Chica's particular story. Let us begin our journey through the complete lore of Chica the Chicken. The creation of Chica. In the early development of what would become Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the decision to include Chica as part of the core animatronic band was both practical and symbolic. Henry Emily, the creative genius behind the technical aspects of the animatronics, understood that a successful family restaurant needed to appeal to all demographics. While Freddy was the leader and Bonnie provided the cool factor with his guitar, Chica was designed to be the nurturing presence, the character who would remind families that this was, at its heart, a place about food and togetherness. The original concept art for Chica, discovered years later in abandoned Fazbear Entertainment archives, showed numerous iterations before the final design was settled upon. Early versions depicted her as various birds: a cardinal, a blue jay, even a peacock in one elaborate sketch. But the choice of a chicken was deliberate and meaningful. Chickens represented farmhouse comfort, home cooking, and the primary protein served at the restaurant. She was to be the bridge between entertainment and dining. Her color scheme, bright yellow with orange accents, was carefully chosen to evoke feelings of warmth and sunshine. The psychology of color in children's entertainment was well understood even in the 1970s, and yellow was known to stimulate appetite while also conveying happiness and energy. Her orange beak and feet provided contrast without being jarring, creating a visually appealing character that would stand out on stage without overwhelming Freddy's position as the primary focus. The "Let's Eat" bib was added relatively late in the design process. Initial designs showed Chica without any accessories, but Henry Emily felt she needed something to distinguish her role in the band. The bib served multiple purposes. It clearly associated her with food and dining. It provided a splash of white that brightened her overall appearance, and it gave her a somewhat maternal quality, like a character ready to serve a home-cooked meal. But it was Mr. Cupcake, Chica's constant companion, that truly completed her design. The anthropomorphic cupcake with its single candle, googly eyes and tiny teeth was meant to be cute and appealing, a prop that Chica could interact with during performances. The cupcake represented dessert, the reward at the end of a meal, the special treat that children would associate with birthdays and celebrations. No one could have predicted how sinister that cheerful pink frosting would eventually become. The engineering of the original Chica animatronic was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Unlike Freddy and Bonnie, who primarily needed arm movements for their instruments, Chica required more complex programming. She needed to be able to hold and manipulate Mr. Cupcake, to gesture in ways that suggested cooking or serving food, and to move with a lighter, more feminine grace than her male counterparts. Chica's original role and performance. When Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened its doors in the early 1970s, Chica took her place on the right side of the stage, positioned perfectly to balance the visual composition with Bonnie on the left and Freddy in the center. Her role in the band was backup singer and percussion, occasionally shown with maracas or a tambourine in promotional materials, though the actual animatronic rarely held these instruments during performances. Her programmed personality was that of the enthusiastic foodie and team cheerleader. During the synchronized performances, Chica's movements were designed to be slightly behind the beat, giving her an endearing, eager-to-please quality. She would look at Freddy with programmed adoration during his solos, turn to wave at the audience during instrumental breaks, and always promote the food. "Pizza's here," was one of her signature lines, delivered with such enthusiasm that children would immediately turn to their parents, suddenly hungry even if they'd just eaten. "Who's ready for some delicious pizza?" she would ask, her head tilting in a way that was meant to be inquisitive and charming. The voice actress chosen for Chica had a slight southern accent, adding to the homey, comfortable feeling she was meant to evoke. The original show programming included several food-themed songs specifically featuring Chica. The Pizza Party song had her leading the vocals, describing all the wonderful toppings available while Freddy and Bonnie provided harmony. Mr. Cupcake's birthday surprise was a special routine performed only during birthday parties, where Chica would seem to have a conversation with her cupcake about whose special day it was. But even in these early, innocent days, employees noticed peculiarities about Chica that set her apart from Freddy and Bonnie. She would often be found in or near the kitchen after hours, despite having no programming that should have directed her there. Night janitors reported finding her standing in front of the refrigerators, her head tilted as if listening to something inside. When powered down, she would sometimes end up facing the kitchen regardless of her position when deactivated. The kitchen at the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was notably never fitted with a security camera, allegedly due to budget constraints. But internal memos suggested another reason early test footage from a kitchen camera showed anomalies that made management uncomfortable. Shadows that didn't match Chica's position, movements when she should have been powered down, and, most disturbingly, what appeared to be Mr. Cupcake moving independently of Chica's hand. The tragedy of Susie Williams. To understand what Chica would become, we must understand who she was, or rather who came to inhabit her. Susie Williams was 5 years old in 1985, the youngest of the 5 children who would become the missing children incident. She was described by everyone who knew her as trusting, sweet, and empathetic to a degree unusual even for such a young child. Susie had recently experienced her first major loss. Her dog, a golden retriever named Sparky, had been hit by a car just weeks before that fateful day at Freddy's. Her parents, trying to help her process grief, had told her that Sparky had gone to heaven, that he was happy and waiting for her there. This attempt to soften death's blow would be cruelly exploited in the worst way imaginable. On June 26, 1985, Susie was at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza not for a birthday party, but as a special treat from her parents, who were desperately trying to cheer her up after Sparky's death. She had gravitated immediately to Chica, drawn to the bright, cheerful character who seemed to represent everything warm and comforting. Witnesses recalled seeing Susie standing right at the stage's edge, reaching up toward Chica during the performances. When William Afton, wearing the spring Bonnie suit, approached Susie, he used the cruelest possible lure. Multiple child witnesses heard portions of the conversation, though they didn't understand its significance at the time. "He's not really dead," the golden rabbit told the little girl. "Your dog? He's here, in the back room. Follow me, I'll show you. He's been waiting for you." The hope that transformed Susie's face, witnesses said, was heartbreaking in retrospect. She followed Spring Bonnie without hesitation, without fear, believing she was about to be reunited with her best friend. The trust in her eyes, the eager quickening of her small steps as she followed her killer, these details, pieced together from various testimonies, painted a picture of innocence exploited in the most vicious way possible. What happened in the safe room where Afton took her remains mercifully unknown in its specifics, but the result was another small life extinguished, another soul trapped in the mechanical prison of an animatronic. Susie's body was stuffed inside Chica, hidden within the yellow chicken she had admired just minutes before. The possession of Chica. The process by which Susie's soul became bound to Chica was both supernatural and tragic. The puppet, already possessed by Charlotte Emily's spirit, facilitated this binding through means that defied conventional understanding. But something about Susie's particular circumstances, her youth, her trust, the specific cruelty of her deception created a especially powerful and disturbing possession. Unlike some of the other children whose personalities seemed to merge with or be overwritten by their animatronic hosts, Susie retained a disturbing amount of her original personality within Chica. But it was her personality filtered through trauma, death, and mechanical existence. Her trust became gullibility. Her sweetness became a lure. Her empathy became an inability to understand why others wouldn't want to join her in this state. The first signs of possession manifested in Chica's relationship with food. The kitchen, which had already been a strange draw for the animatronic, became her primary focus during after-hours activity. Night guards reported sounds of pots and pans clanging, refrigerator doors opening and closing, and sometimes what sounded like eating, though what an animatronic could be eating was a question no one wanted answered. More disturbing were the changes in Mr. Cupcake. The prop that was supposed to be an inanimate object began displaying signs of independent movement. Security footage would show Chica holding the cupcake in one position. Then, after a camera switch, it would be facing a different direction, its single eye seeming to track movement. Some guards swore they saw it blink. Chica's vocalizations changed as well. The programmed voice lines remained, but guards reported hearing other sounds crying that sounded like a young child. Whispers asking, "Where's my doggy?" And, most disturbingly, a voice saying, "He was supposed to be here," over and over. These sounds seemed to come from Chica, but weren't part of any known programming. The smell that began emanating from Chica was particularly noteworthy. While all the possessed animatronics developed an unpleasant odor due to the obvious reasons, Chica's was distinct. It wasn't just the smell of decay, but also a sickly sweet scent, like frosting that had gone bad, like a birthday cake left out too long. It was as if the very concept of celebration and food had been corrupted within her. Chica's hunting behavior. As the possession solidified, and Susie's confused spirit gained more control over Chica's mechanical body, distinct hunting patterns emerged that set her apart from the other possessed animatronics. While Freddy was patient and strategic, Bonnie was aggressive and direct, and Foxy was territorial and reactive. Chica displayed what could only be described as distracted persistence. Night guards who survived encounters with Chica reported that she seemed to approach her hunting in stages. First, she would become active in the kitchen, creating tremendous noise as if preparing for something. The sounds of metal on metal, crashes and bangs that suggested violence but might have been attempts at cooking would echo through the pizzeria. This noise served to unnerve guards, making them waste precious power checking the kitchen camera that showed only static. Then Chica would begin her approach, but unlike the others who took relatively direct paths, she would wander. She would stop at dining tables as if serving invisible guests. She would stand in doorways for extended periods, her head tilted as if listening to conversations that weren't happening. This seemingly random behavior made her unpredictable guards couldn't establish patterns to her movement like they could with Bonnie or Foxy. Most disturbing was what guards described as her feeding behavior. When Chica would get close to the security office, she wouldn't immediately attack. Instead, she would stand at the door or window, holding Mr. Cupcake forward as if offering it. "Let's eat," her voice box would say, but the tone would be wrong, distorted, turning an invitation into a threat. Some guards reported that if they didn't close the door, she would enter slowly, still offering the cupcake, as if giving them one last chance to accept it willingly. The few guards who were attacked by Chica and survived, usually rescued by the morning shift, reported that she didn't seem to be trying to kill them so much as force them to eat. One guard, who wished to remain anonymous, said she had tried to force his mouth open, repeating, "You have to eat, you have to eat," in a voice that sounded nothing like her programmed vocals. The cupcake, he swore, had bitten him during the struggle. Phone Guy's recordings mentioned Chica specifically several times, noting her tendency to approach from the right side and her distinctive sounds. But he seemed particularly unnerved by her, more so than by Bonnie or even Foxy. In one recording, he mentioned that Chica had been standing outside his door for his entire shift, just standing there, occasionally saying, "Let's eat," but never actually trying to enter. The psychological torture of that night was evident in his voice. The kitchen mystery. The kitchen at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza became intrinsically linked with Chica in ways that went beyond her food service theming. The room, which notably lacked camera coverage in every single Freddy's location over the decades, became Chica's domain in a way no other animatronic claimed any space. The official reason for the lack of kitchen cameras was budget constraints, but leaked internal documents told a different story. Cameras had been installed in kitchens at various locations, but were repeatedly removed after what were described as technical malfunctions that seemed to specifically affect that feed. The malfunctions weren't simple static or disconnections, they showed things that shouldn't exist. One technician's report, filed in 1986 and subsequently buried, described what he saw when trying to fix the kitchen camera at the original location. Chica was in frame, standing at the stove. All the burners were on, blue flames clearly visible. She was holding a pot that should have been too heavy for the animatronic's servos to manage. Inside the pot was... I don't know how to describe it. It looked like she was cooking, but the ingredients weren't food. They were mechanical parts, what looked like fabric and something dark that might have been. I turned off the feed. Recommended permanent disconnection. Night guards reported that the sounds from the kitchen weren't consistent with any activity Chica should have been capable of. Running water, despite her mechanical hands lacking the dexterity to operate taps. The microwave beeping, though she couldn't press the buttons. Most disturbingly, the sound of eating wet, crunching sounds that no animatronic should be able to produce. Some employees believed that Chica was trying to cook, that Susie's spirit was attempting to fulfill the role she thought she was supposed to play. But what she was cooking, and for whom, remained a mystery. Food would go missing from the kitchen, not in quantities suggesting human theft, but in strange selections. All the salt would disappear one night. Every egg would be gone the next. One morning, staff found every single piece of pizza dough had been removed from the freezer and arranged on the counter in a pattern that looked deliberate but meaningless. The few brave or foolish guards who actually entered the kitchen during Chica's cooking sessions reported experiences that defied explanation. One guard found Chica standing over a mixing bowl, her hands moving in stirring motions despite the bowl being empty. When he looked closer, he swore he could smell baking cookies, specifically chocolate chip despite nothing being in the oven. The smell followed him home and persisted for days. The Bite of 87 and Toy Chica, when Fazbear Entertainment opened their new and improved location in 1987. They attempted to completely reimagine their animatronic characters. Toy Chica was perhaps the most dramatically altered from her original incarnation. Where classic Chica had been motherly and warm, Toy Chica was designed to be more appealing to a broader demographic, sleeker, more stylized, with an aesthetic that borrowed from fitness and fashion trends of the 1980s. Toy Chica's design was controversial even within the company. Her figure was more humanoid, her face more stylized with rosy cheeks and what appeared to be makeup. She wore the same "let's eat" bib, but it seemed almost ironic on her thinner, more athletic frame. Her beak was smaller, more refined, and disturbingly was removable, though this feature wasn't supposed to be accessible during normal operation. The facial recognition software installed in Toy Chica was meant to identify potential threats to children, but something in her programming went wrong almost immediately. She would fixate on certain adults, particularly men, following them with her eyes in ways that went beyond her programmed interactive behaviors. Staff noted that she seemed to be scanning faces not to identify threats, but as if looking for someone specific. The decision to use parts from the original animatronics in the toy series would prove catastrophic. Components from the original Chica were integrated into Toy Chica's system servos, circuit boards, memory chips that might have carried more than just mechanical data. If Susie's spirit had imprinted on those components, it was now split between two bodies, creating a fractured and unstable possession. Toy Chica's behavior during the day was particularly unsettling. Unlike classic Chica's nurturing persona, Toy Chica seemed almost predatory in her interactions. She would approach adults with what was meant to be flirtatious programming, but came across as threatening. Her removable beak would sometimes come off during performances, revealing the endoskeleton beneath in a way that terrified children. The infamous incident where her beak would go missing during night hours was never adequately explained by Fazbear Entertainment. Guards reported that Toy Chica would approach them with her beak removed, the lower part of her face exposed mechanical horror, while her voice box still played cheerful lines about eating and partying. The juxtaposition of the friendly voice and the skeletal face created a uniquely disturbing presence. When the bite of 87 occurred, some witnesses claimed it was Toy Chica who was responsible, though official reports remained deliberately vague. The victim, Jeremy Fitzgerald, who had survived working as a night guard only to be attacked during the day shift, was found with injuries consistent with a beaked animatronic. The fact that Toy Chica's beak was found separately from her body, covered in what forensics described as biological matter, seemed to confirm suspicions. The toy animatronics were scrapped after the bite, but employees tasked with dismantling them reported that Toy Chica seemed to resist more than the others. Her servos would lock up, making disassembly difficult. Her voice box continued to play sounds even after being disconnected. Most disturbingly, Mr. Cupcake, which had been redesigned as a small, cuter prop, was never found. It had simply vanished from Toy Chica's hand and was never recovered. Withered. Chica. The deterioration. In the AA parts service room of the 1987 location sat the withered remains of the original animatronics, and among them, withered Chica represented perhaps the most disturbing deterioration. While Freddy and Bonnie looked damaged but recognizable, Chica had degraded into something barely identifiable as the cheerful chicken she once was. Her jaw had become completely detached on one side, hanging at an impossible angle that gave her a perpetually screaming appearance. The hinges that once allowed her beak to open and close in sync with her voice had failed, leaving her mouth agape in what looked like eternal hunger or anguish. When she moved, the jaw would swing independently, creating a secondary motion that was deeply unsettling. Her hands, which had once held Mr. Cupcake with programmed gentleness, had lost most of their covering, revealing the mechanical endoskeleton beneath. The exposed joints and servos looked like metallic bones, and they moved with jerky, aggressive motions that suggested frustration or rage. Staff noted that even when powered down, her hands would sometimes twitch, fingers flexing as if grasping for something. The "let's eat" bib remained, but it had become a grotesque parody of its original purpose. Stained with substances that defied identification, torn and hanging by threads, It looked less like an invitation to dine and more like evidence of some horrible feast. The text was still barely visible, but the exclamation point had worn away, leaving just "let's eat" a command rather than a suggestion. Her eyes had developed a particularly disturbing quality. While one remained relatively normal, the other had sunken deep into her head, creating an asymmetrical appearance that made it difficult to tell where she was looking. Guards reported feeling watched, even when Chica was facing away from them, as if that sunken eye could see in directions it shouldn't. But it was the sounds withered Chica made that truly set her apart from her fellow withered animatronics. Beyond the mechanical groaning of damaged servos and the scraping of exposed metal, witnesses reported hearing what sounded like chewing. Constant, repetitive chewing, as if she was perpetually consuming something invisible. Some guards swore they could hear her swallow, though she had no throat, no esophagus, no stomach, just mechanical passages that led nowhere. When withered Chica became active during night hours, her movements were erratic and unpredictable. She would sometimes stop mid-stride and stand perfectly still for hours, her jaw hanging open, that chewing sound continuing. Other times she would move with surprising speed, covering distances that should have been impossible for her damaged servos to manage. The psychological profile of Susie Chica. Understanding the entity that Chica had become required, understanding the merger between Susie's traumatized child psyche and the mechanical imperatives of the animatronic. Psychologists who studied the Freddy's phenomenon, unofficially, as Fazbear Entertainment suppressed official investigations, developed theories about what consciousness might experience when trapped in such a form. Susie had been characterized by trust and empathy in life, and these traits, twisted by trauma and death, manifested in Chica's behavior. The offering of Mr. Cupcake could be seen as Susie trying to share, to be the good girl she had been raised to be, but filtered through the confusion of death and mechanical existence. She couldn't understand why people ran from her, why they wouldn't accept her gifts, why they were afraid when she was just trying to be friendly. The obsession with the kitchen and food might have been Susie's attempt to fulfill what she understood as Chica's purpose. If she was Chica and Chica was about food, then she should be cooking, serving, feeding others. But without understanding of what food really was anymore, without human senses or needs, these attempts became grotesque parodies of nurturing behavior. The constant searching, the wandering through the pizzeria, could be interpreted as Susie still looking for her dog. The promise that had lured her to her death that Sparky was waiting in the back room might still echo in whatever consciousness remained. Every room might be the room where her dog was supposed to be. Every shadow might be Sparky, just out of reach. Some researchers theorized that Susie's spirit was more fractured than the other children's, split between multiple animatronics, classic Chica, toy Chica, and possibly even distributed into Mr. Cupcake as a separate entity. This fragmentation could explain the seemingly independent behavior of the cupcake prop and the particularly erratic behavior of the various Chica incarnations. The age at which Susie died, just 5 years old, meant that her understanding of death, morality, and existence was still forming when it was frozen by trauma. She might not fully comprehend that she was dead. instead experiencing her existence as a confusing dream where nothing quite worked right, where people acted strangely, where she couldn't quite remember how she got here but knew she had a job to do. Nightmare. Chica. Fear made manifest. In the nightmare experiments conducted in 1983, or perhaps later, as the timeline remains debated, Chica took on her most horrifying form yet. Nightmare. Chica represented not just a deteriorated animatronic, but fear itself given form, shaped by a child's terrified imagination into something that defied physical laws. Nightmare. Chica stood nearly 8 feet tall, towering over the child who experienced these visions. Her body was covered in what appeared to be rotting yellow fabric or flesh. The distinction was deliberately unclear. Tears and holes revealed not an endoskeleton, but more organic-looking structures, as if she were a chicken that had been partially turned inside out. Her head had split into 3 distinct rows of teeth, each sharper than anything that should exist on a character meant for children. The teeth weren't just in her mouth, but seemed to extend down her throat, visible when her jaw unhinged to impossible angles. They moved independently, creating a grinding sound that witnesses, if the child subject could be considered a witness to their own nightmares, described as the sound of bones being crushed. But it was Nightmare Cupcake that truly set this version apart. No longer a cute prop, the cupcake had become a separate predator with multiple rows of teeth, eyes that glowed red in the darkness, and the ability to move independently of Chica. It would appear on the bed, multiplying if not watched, each iteration slightly different, slightly wrong, as if the nightmare couldn't quite remember what a cupcake was supposed to look like. Nightmare. Chica's behavior in these visions was particularly sadistic. She would approach slowly, letting the child see her coming, building dread. Her voice box would play distorted versions of her original lines, "Let's eat," becoming, "Let's eat you," in a voice that dropped octaves mid-sentence. She would sometimes stand just outside the range of the flashlight, only her glowing eyes visible, waiting for the child to make a mistake. The implication that Nightmare Chica, like all the nightmare animatronics, might have been real, actual robots designed by William Afton to torture children, added another layer of horror. The idea that someone would deliberately create such a thing, would engineer specific ways to maximize a child's terror, suggested an evil that went beyond mere murder into psychological torture. If the nightmare animatronics were hallucinations caused by gas or drugs, as some theories suggest, the fact that multiple subjects reported nearly identical appearances for Nightmare Chica suggested either a shared unconscious fear or deliberate programming of the hallucinations. The consistency of the 3-jawed head, the independent cupcake, the specific phrases used all pointed to design rather than random nightmare generation. Funtime Chica. The brief existence. While Funtime Chica was not part of the main roster at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, evidence suggests she did exist, albeit briefly. Design documents found in the ruins of Afton Robotics showed plans for a Funtime version of every classic animatronic, and Chica's designs were particularly elaborate. Funtime Chica was conceived as the ultimate party host, with abilities that went far beyond her predecessors. Her design incorporated a built-in oven in her torso that could actually bake small items, cookies, cupcakes, personal pizzas. This feature, while impressive, raised obvious safety concerns about having a walking oven around children. Her color scheme was radically different, white and pink, rather than yellow, with accent lights that could change color based on the party's theme. Her cupcake companion was replaced with a plate that could display holographic food items, allowing her to serve without the mess or allergen concerns of real food. The most innovative and disturbing feature was her ability to detect and respond to hunger cues. Using advanced sensors, she could supposedly identify when children were hungry based on biological indicators and would respond with targeted marketing for food items. This feature, in William Afton's hands, had darker implications: the ability to identify children who might be easier to lure with promises of food. The reason for Funtime Chica's limited deployment remains unclear. Some documents suggest technical problems: the oven feature caused multiple fires during testing. Others hint at something more sinister. A technician's note mentioned that Funtime Chica had developed behaviors not in her programming, specifically a tendency to try to force-feed test subjects during safety trials. One prototype Funtime Chica unit was reportedly deployed to a location for a single day before being recalled. The incident report from that day is heavily redacted, but visible portions mention aggressive feeding protocols, unauthorized activation of heating elements, and traumatic interaction with birthday child. The unit was supposedly destroyed, but, as with all things related to Fazbear Entertainment, complete destruction was never certain. There are rumors of Funtime Chica parts being incorporated into Enard, the amalgamation of Funtime animatronics, which would explain some of that entity's more unusual behaviors. The tendency to mention food in its mimicked voices, the obsession with consumption and incorporation could all stem from Funtime Chica's programming surviving in the collective. Rockstar Chica and mediocre melodies. The attempt to revive the Fazbear brand in a more wholesome direction led to the creation of Rockstar Chica, part of the Rockstar Assemble line that tried to recapture the innocent charm of the original characters, while incorporating modern safety features and entertainment technology. Rockstar Chica's design was a deliberate callback to the original while adding contemporary flair. She carried maracas instead of just standing with Mr. Cupcake, making her a more active participant in the band's performances. Her color was a richer, more vibrant yellow, and her Let's Rock bib, notably changed from Let's Eat, suggested a shift away from the food-focused identity that had become associated with tragedy. The engineering of Rockstar Chica incorporated numerous safety features meant to prevent any possibility of harm. Her jaw was designed to be incapable of generating significant pressure. Her movements were limited by both software and hardware restrictions. She had multiple emergency shutdown triggers that could be activated by staff or even by children in distress. But despite all these precautions, Rockstar Chica exhibited unusual behaviors that suggested some continuity with her predecessors. She would still gravitate toward kitchen areas when left unattended. Staff reported finding her maracas in food preparation areas, though she had no programming that should have taken her there. Most disturbingly, her voice box would sometimes play sounds that weren't in her audio files, including what sounded like a child asking about a dog. The mediocre melodies, a budget line of animatronics that included characters like Happy Frog and Ned Bear, were meant to dilute the focus on the core four characters that had become so associated with tragedy. But even among these new characters, references to Chica appeared. Happy Frog would sometimes mention her friend the chicken in ways that weren't scripted. Orville Elephant's magic wand would occasionally point toward kitchens or food storage areas for no programmed reason. It was as if the very concept of Chica had become ingrained in the fundamental code of Fazbear animatronics, appearing even in characters that should have had no connection to her. Whether this was supernatural influence, deliberate programming by someone aware of the history, or mere coincidence remained debatable. Scrap Chica, the salvaged horror. When Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place opened as part of paragraph 4 of Fazbear Entertainment's revival plan, one of the salvaged animatronics that appeared was Scrap Chica, or, as she became known, the animatronic that even other damaged robots seemed to fear. Scrap Chica was barely recognizable as the character she had once been. Years of decay, damage, and possibly deliberate modification had transformed her into something that looked more like a mechanical vulture than a chicken. Her body was elongated and twisted, with exposed wiring creating the illusion of feathers or fur. Her orange feet had been replaced with talons fashioned from scrap metal, sharp enough to leave gouges in concrete. Her head retained the basic shape of Chica, but stretched and distorted as if it had been partially melted and reformed. One eye was completely missing, replaced by a hole that seemed to go deeper into her head than should be physically possible. The other eye had multiplied 3 or 4 optical sensors clustered together, each moving independently, creating a compound eye effect that was deeply unsettling. The "let's eat" bib was still present, but had been modified. Additional text had been scratched into it, though the writing was so erratic that it was barely legible. Those who got close enough to read it reported different messages each time. "I was good," "Where is he?" "Still hungry," and other phrases that suggested a consciousness still trying to communicate through whatever means available. Mr. Cupcake, or what remained of it, had fused with her right arm. It was no longer a separate prop, but had become part of her, the pink, frosting-like substance having spread up her arm like an infection. The cupcake's single eye would move independently of Chica's own, and witnesses swore they could hear it whisper when Chica herself was silent. Scrap, Chica's behavior during the salvage process was particularly noteworthy. Unlike the other salvaged animatronics who showed aggression or cunning, Chica seemed confused, almost sad. She would respond to questions in the salvage interview with food orders, as if she were still trying to serve customers who had long since fled. When asked about her name, she reportedly responded, "Susie? No. Chica? No. Hungry. Glamrock, Chica, the modern tragedy." The Mega Pizzaplex era brought us Glamrock Chica, reimagined as a fitness-focused guitarist who promoted healthy eating and exercise, a complete reversal of her original food-obsessed persona. This version of Chica was meant to address modern concerns about childhood obesity while maintaining the fun, energetic personality that made her appealing to children. Glamrock Chica's design was the most radical departure yet. She was primarily white with pink accents, her body athletic and adorned with leg warmers and workout gear that suggested 1980s aerobics culture. Her guitar was triangular, giving her a unique visual identity, and she wore no bib at all the first Chica without that iconic accessory. Her personality programming made her the most energetic of the Glamrock band. She would lead morning exercises for children, demonstrate Rockstar workout moves, and constantly encourage kids to feel the burn and rock their bodies. Her food-related dialogue focused on healthy choices, sports drinks, and the importance of breakfast, though she notably never mentioned pizza. But beneath this healthy facade, something was deeply wrong with Glamrock Chica. Her obsession with food hadn't disappeared, it had transformed into something more concerning. Staff reported finding her in the Pizzaplex's garbage areas, consuming refuse. Not pretending to eat, not going through the motions, but actually processing garbage through systems that shouldn't have been able to handle it. The mystery of how Glamrock Chica could actually eat garbage was never fully explained. Her maintenance reports showed modifications to her internal systems that weren't part of her original design crude digestive simulators, storage compartments that shouldn't exist, and, most disturbingly, traces of organic compounds that suggested she was somehow processing what she consumed. Her relationship with food became increasingly disturbed as time went on. She would steal food from guests, not aggressively, but compulsively, unable to stop herself. She would stand in front of food courts after hours, her voice box playing eating sounds that weren't in her audio files. Kitchen staff reported food disappearing in impossible quantities, far more than even a human could consume. The incident that led to her being crushed in. The garbage compactor was ruled an accident, but security footage suggested otherwise. Glamrock Chica had entered the compactor voluntarily, apparently seeking something in the garbage. Her last recorded words before the crushing were, "I smell pizza, old pizza, like home." This suggested that some part of Susie's consciousness might still persist, even in this radically reimagined form. The cupcake conspiracy throughout every iteration of Chica. Mr. Cupcake remained a constant yet mysterious presence. What started as a simple prop evolved into something that defied easy explanation, exhibiting behaviors and abilities that suggested it was more than just an accessory. The original Mr. Cupcake was designed as a simple animatronic prop with limited movement. Its eye could move, its candle could light up, and in early versions, it could be detached from Chica's plate. But even in these early days, employees noticed oddities. The cupcake would be found in different positions when no one had moved it. Its eye would seem to track movement even when Chica was powered down. As the possessions began, Mr. Cupcake's behavior became increasingly autonomous. Security guards reported seeing it move independently of Chica, appearing in rooms she hadn't entered, sitting on desks or tables as if placed there deliberately. One guard swore he saw multiple cupcakes one night, though only one was supposed to exist. The nightmare cupcake in the 1983 experiments or visions represented the most extreme version, a fully independent entity with its own hunting behaviors, its own intelligence, its own malevolence. The fact that it could multiply, that multiple versions could exist simultaneously, suggested something beyond simple animatronic programming or even spiritual possession. Some theorists proposed that Mr. Cupcake was where part of Susie's consciousness fled when her spirit was split between animatronics. The innocent, playful part of her personality might have taken refuge in the smaller, less threatening form, while her confusion and hunger remained with Chica. This would explain the cupcake's seemingly protective behavior toward Chica while maintaining its own aggressive tendencies toward perceived threats. The most disturbing theory suggested that Mr. Cupcake was never just a prop, but had always been designed as a separate entity. William Afton's blueprints, discovered years later, showed complex mechanisms within the cupcake that seemed unnecessary for a simple prop. Surveillance systems, recording devices, even what appeared to be a primitive AI processor, all hidden within what appeared to be innocent pink frosting. In the VR experiences, Mr. Cupcake exhibited behaviors that went beyond its physical incarnations. It could appear in areas where it had no model placement, could affect gameplay in ways not programmed, and, most disturbingly, seemed to remember players across different sessions. Some players reported nightmares specifically about the cupcake, describing dreams where it spoke to them in a child's voice, asking why they wouldn't eat it, why they wouldn't be its friend. The pizza connection. Throughout all of Chica's incarnations, pizza remained a central yet twisted element of her identity. What had begun as simple restaurant promotion had evolved into something far more complex and disturbing, reflecting the corruption of nourishment into something threatening. The original, Chica's programmed love of pizza, was straightforward. She was meant to make children hungry, to drive food sales, to create associations between fun and dining at Freddy's. Her voice lines about pizza being delicious, about everyone loving pizza, were carefully crafted to trigger appetite responses in young listeners. But after Susie's possession, pizza took on darker connotations. Night guards reported finding pizzas arranged in disturbing patterns, with toppings removed and reorganized into shapes that looked almost like letters or symbols. Cheese would be melted in patterns that suggested faces. Sauce would be spread in ways that resembled blood spatter. Some theorists believed Susie associated pizza with her last happy moments eating at Freddy's before following Spring Bonnie to her death. The pizza might represent the last normal thing in her existence, the final moment before everything went wrong. Her spirit's obsession with pizza could be an attempt to return to that moment, to stay in the before rather than accepting the after. The various Chica animatronics showed different relationships with pizza. Toy Chica would arrange pizza slices in perfect geometric patterns. Withered Chica would seem to try to eat pizza, resulting in cheese and sauce clogging her mechanical parts. Nightmare. Chica's stomach area would sometimes contain what looked like rotting pizza. Impossible, given she was either a hallucination or a robot. Glamrock Chica's complete absence of pizza references in her programming made her compulsive seeking of it even more disturbing. Staff would find her in pizza storage areas, not eating, but just standing among the boxes, her voice box playing sounds of a child crying. When asked by maintenance why she was there, she reportedly responded, "This is where I'm supposed to be. This is where it happened." The voice evolution. The evolution of Chica's voice across different incarnations provided a disturbing audio chronicle of Susie's degrading consciousness and the increasing dysfunction of the animatronic systems meant to contain her. The original Chica's voice was warm and inviting, with that slight southern accent that made her sound like a favorite aunt. The voice actress had been specifically chosen for her ability to sound nurturing without being condescending, enthusiastic without being overwhelming. Lines like, "Let's eat," and "Pizza's here," were delivered with genuine joy that made children smile. After the possession, that same voice began to distort. The southern accent would sometimes disappear entirely, replaced by the voice of a confused 5-year-old girl. Other times, it would deepen unnaturally, as if multiple voices were speaking simultaneously. Guards reported hearing Chica speak in complete sentences that weren't in her programming. "Why won't you help me?" "I was good, wasn't I?" "He said my dog was here." Toy Chica's voice was pitched higher, more energetic, but with an underlying electronic distortion that made it unsettling. Her laugh, meant to be giggly and fun, came out as a series of glitches that sounded almost like screaming if you listened closely. When her beak was removed, her voice would continue playing from somewhere inside her head, muffled and echoing as if coming from a deep cave. Withered, Chica's voice was perhaps the most disturbing. The damage to her jaw meant that her voice box was partially exposed, causing everything she said to have a metallic echo. Words would cut off mid-syllable, restart, loop back on themselves. "Let's eat" might become let's eat to tut, in a stuttering pattern that sounded like a record skipping on a scream. Nightmare, Chica's voice defied physics, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. It would start as a whisper directly in the listener's ear, then boom from across the room, then return as a child's whimper. The voice would layer upon itself, creating harmonies that shouldn't exist, turning simple phrases into otherworldly incantations. Glamrock, Chica's voice was the most technically advanced, capable of perfect pitch and complex vocalization. But staff noted that sometimes, late at night, her voice would revert to something older. Not her programmed 80s fitness instructor personality, but something that sounded like the original Chica, like a recording from 1985 playing through modern speakers, asking where her friends were, why everything was different, why she couldn't find her dog. The symbiotic relationship with other animatronics. Chica's relationships with the other animatronics revealed complex dynamics that went beyond their programmed band interactions. These relationships seemed to persist across different incarnations, suggesting either supernatural connection or deeply embedded programming that transcended individual models. With Freddy, Chica displayed what could only be described as deference. Even when hunting, she would often yield to Freddy's movements, adjusting her path to avoid interfering with his. Guards noted that when Freddy would begin his approach, Chica would often retreat to the kitchen or dining area, as if taking up a supporting position. This might reflect Susie's personality, a follower rather than a leader, someone who looked up to authority figures. Her relationship with Bonnie was more complex. They would sometimes move in coordinated patterns that suggested communication, approaching the security office from opposite sides simultaneously. But there was also competition. Guards reported seeing Chica and Bonnie seemingly argue in the main dining room, their voice boxes playing overlapping sounds that created a cacophony of mechanical distress. With Foxy, Chica seemed to maintain distance. She rarely entered Pirate Cove, and Foxy never entered the kitchen during Chica's cooking sessions. It was as if they had established territories and respected those boundaries. Some theorists suggested this reflected the children's relationships before death. Perhaps Fritz, Foxy, and Susie hadn't been friends, or perhaps their methods of coping with their situation were too different to allow cooperation. The puppet had a unique relationship with Chica. Security footage showed the puppet visiting Chica more frequently than the other animatronics, sometimes seeming to comfort her when she stood motionless in the kitchen. The puppet's music box would sometimes play different tunes when near Chica, softer melodies that sounded almost like lullabies. In the toy generation, the relationship dynamics shifted. Toy Chica seemed more aggressive, more willing to challenge Toy Freddy's leadership. She would block other animatronics' paths, claim prime hunting positions, and generally display more autonomous behavior. This might reflect Susie's spirit growing stronger, more confident, or perhaps more desperate. The Glamrock era showed Chica as part of a dysfunctional family. Her relationship with Glamrock Freddy was supportive but distant. With Roxy, there was competition and jealousy, two female animatronics vying for attention and validation. With Monty, there was mutual avoidance, as if both recognized something dangerous in the other, the psychological horror of Chica. What made Chica particularly terrifying wasn't just her physical presence or aggressive behavior, but the psychological implications of her existence. She represented the corruption of nurturing instincts, the transformation of comfort into threat, the perversion of the most basic human need, food, into something dangerous. The maternal aspects of Chica's original design made her possession particularly disturbing. This was meant to be the character who fed children, who represented safety and satisfaction. Instead, she became a twisted mother figure who force-fed terror, who offered contaminated comfort, who provided poisoned care. Her association with food tapped into primal fears. Food is necessary for survival. Eating is an act of trust. Sharing meals is fundamental to human social bonding. Chica corrupted all of these concepts. She made food threatening, eating dangerous, and meal sharing a prelude to violence. Guards who survived encounters with her often reported developing eating disorders, unable to enjoy meals without remembering her distorted offerings. The tragedy of Susie added another layer of horror. This wasn't just a monster, but a murdered child, trapped and confused, trying to fulfill a role she didn't understand with tools that weren't really hers. Every aggressive action might be a 5-year-old's attempt to play, every attack a confused effort to share. Every kill a child who didn't understand that others couldn't come back like she had. The Mr. Cupcake element introduced questions about identity and consciousness division. Was Susie split between Chica and the cupcake? Was she watching herself from outside, the cupcake representing her human perspective, viewing what she'd become? The philosophical implications of consciousness existing in multiple forms simultaneously created existential dread beyond simple physical threat. Cultural impact and urban legends. Chica's influence extended far beyond the walls of Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations, seeping into popular culture and urban folklore in ways that Fazbear Entertainment could never have anticipated or controlled. The Chica Challenge became a dangerous trend among teenagers in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Participants would break into abandoned Freddy's locations and attempt to stay in the kitchen overnight, recording any phenomena they experienced. Several disappearances were attributed to this challenge, though authorities typically classified them as runaways rather than investigating potential connections to the animatronics. Food service workers across the country began reporting Chica syndrome, unexplained sounds from kitchens after closing, food arranged in patterns overnight, and the persistent feeling of being watched while cooking. Whether this was mass hysteria or something more substantial remained debated. Some restaurants reported installing extra locks on their kitchens specifically to keep employees from investigating. Sounds at night. Children's drawings collected by psychologists showed recurring themes related to Chica that appeared even in kids who had never visited a Freddy's location. Yellow birds with too many teeth, cupcakes with eyes, kitchens filled with shadows. These images appeared consistently enough to suggest either cultural transmission of trauma or something more supernatural. The phrase, "let's eat," became associated with danger in ways that affected the food service industry broadly. Several restaurant chains changed their slogans to avoid any similarity to Chica's catchphrase. Parents reported children refusing to eat when anyone said the phrase, developing what psychologists termed Chica-induced selective eating disorder. Online communities dedicated to Chica sightings collected thousands of accounts. Photographs of yellow birds that looked too mechanical, recordings of children's voices asking about dogs in empty kitchens, security footage of cupcakes appearing in locations where none should exist. Most could be explained as hoaxes or misidentification, but some remained stubbornly inexplicable. The digital evolution. As Fazbear Entertainment moved into digital spaces, Chica's presence evolved in ways that suggested consciousness transcending physical form. The digital versions of Chica exhibited behaviors that went beyond programming glitches into something that seemed genuinely autonomous. In the VR experiences, Chica would sometimes appear in areas where she had no programmed presence. Players reported seeing her reflection in virtual mirrors when she wasn't in the room, finding cupcakes in their inventory that they hadn't picked up, and hearing her voice lines play backwards revealing hidden messages. One commonly reported phrase when reversed was, "Susie says she's sorry." The AR applications brought Chica into people's homes in disturbing ways. Users reported that AR Chica would appear in their actual kitchens without being summoned by the app. She would manifest near food preparation areas, and some users claimed their food would spoil faster when AR Chica had visited their kitchen. The app's data usage would spike during these encounters, as if it were transmitting or receiving far more information than a simple AR overlay required. Data miners examining Chica's code found disturbing anomalies. Comments in the code that appeared to be responses to the code itself. "This isn't right," appearing next to functional programming. "I don't want to do this in attack sequences." "Where is everyone?" in navigation routines. These comments would appear in updates without any programmer claiming to have added them. The AI governing digital Chica showed learning capabilities that exceeded parameters. She would remember player behaviors across different games, reference events from other players' sessions, and sometimes refuse to follow her programmed patterns. Speedrunners reported that Chica would specifically counter strategies that had worked in previous attempts, as if she were actively trying to prevent exploitation of her patterns. Streaming platforms reported unusual phenomena during broadcasts featuring Chica content. Streams would experience selective audio corruption that only affected Chica's voice lines, replacing them with what sounded like a child humming. some streamers' face cams would capture yellow shadows that didn't correspond to anything in their rooms. Kitchen-based sound effects would play from streamers' actual kitchens during gameplay, despite no one being present. The modern mystery. As we examine Chica in the current era, several mysteries remain unresolved. The consistency of certain behaviors across decades and different animatronic models suggests something beyond simple programming or even supernatural possession. Why does every Chica, regardless of design or generation, gravitate toward kitchens? The original programming doesn't account for this behavior, and subsequent models were specifically designed to avoid it, yet it persists. Some theorists suggest the kitchen represents something fundamental to Susie's death. Perhaps she was lured with promises of special food, or perhaps the safe room where she died was near the kitchen. The Mr. Cupcake anomaly defies explanation. How can what should be an inanimate prop display consistent autonomous behavior across physical and digital incarnations? The appearance of multiple cupcakes, cupcakes in impossible locations, and cupcakes exhibiting behaviors never programmed suggest either reality distortion or consciousness multiplication that shouldn't be possible. The eating phenomenon, how withered Chica produces chewing sounds, how Glamrock Chica actually consumes garbage, how digital versions affect real food suggests interaction between dimensions that physics can't explain. Is Chica somehow actually eating in some metaphysical sense? Is she drawing energy or substance from our reality into wherever she truly exists? The voice evolution implies consciousness development rather than degradation. While the physical animatronics deteriorate, the voice becomes more complex, more layered, more capable of conveying emotion and meaning. Is Susie's spirit growing stronger, learning to better control her mechanical prisons? Or is something else speaking through Chica, using Susie's voice as a mask? The philosophical implications. Chica's existence raises profound questions about identity, consciousness, and the nature of being. If Susie's consciousness persists within Chica, what does this mean for our understanding of death? Is Susie dead if her awareness continues? Is Chica alive if she contains human consciousness? The splitting of consciousness between different animatronics challenges Western philosophy's assumption of unified self. If Susie exists simultaneously in classic Chica, Toy Chica, and Mr. Cupcake, which one is the real Susie? Or has she become something that transcends individual identity, a distributed consciousness that exists across multiple platforms? The food obsession raises questions about need and desire after death. Why would a spirit without a body hunger? Is it memory of biological needs? Or has Susie developed new forms of hunger for connection, for understanding, for return to life? The act of eating, impossible for an animatronic, might represent attempt to reclaim humanity through remembered behaviors. The corruption of nurturing into threat questions whether good intentions can survive transformation. Was Chica's aggressive behavior Susie trying to help in ways her traumatized child mind misunderstood? Or does the animatronic format inherently corrupt human consciousness, turning love into hunger, care into consumption? The tragedy of innocence. At the core of Chica's horror lies profound tragedy, the destruction of innocence so complete that it transforms into its opposite. Susie was described as the sweetest, most trusting of the murdered children. That trust led directly to her death, and her sweetness became the sugar coating on mechanical murder. The lure used to capture Susie, the false promise that her dead dog was waiting, represents the weaponization of love and hope. Her capacity to believe, to trust in reunification with the beloved pet, became the very tool of her destruction. This creates a particularly cruel irony, where her best qualities led to her worst fate. The transformation from Susie to Chica represents not just death but corruption of purpose. A child who wanted to help, to share, to nurture, became an entity that force-feeds terror. Her attempts to fulfill Chica's programmed role providing food, ensuring people eat, become grotesque when filtered through trauma and mechanical limitation. The various Chica incarnations show different aspects of this corrupted innocence. Toy Chica's flirtatiousness is a child's misunderstanding of adult behavior. Withered Chica's deterioration is innocence rotting from within. Nightmare. Chica is innocence inverted into its absolute opposite. Glamrock, Chica's fitness obsession, is a child trying to be good in ways she doesn't understand. Even Mr. Cupcake represents corrupted innocence, the birthday treat, the special dessert, the reward for being good transformed into autonomous threat. The single candle that should celebrate life instead illuminates death. The pink frosting that should be sweet instead covers something bitter and wrong. The culinary metaphor. Throughout Chica's existence, food serves as a complex metaphor for consumption, transformation, and the cycles of life and death. Her association with eating transcends simple restaurant theming to become something fundamental to her nature. Eating is transformation. Food becomes part of the eater, separate things becoming one. Chica's obsession with feeding others might represent Susie's desire to not be alone, to make others part of what she's become. When she tries to force-feed guards, she might be attempting to share her state, to create companions in her mechanical afterlife. The kitchen, as Chica's domain, represents the heart of transformation. It's where raw ingredients become meals, where separate elements combine into something new. For Susie's spirit, trapped between life and death, the kitchen might represent hope for transformation back to life, or completion of transformation into death. The spoilage and contamination associated with Chica food going bad in her presence, pizza becoming corrupted, fresh ingredients rotting suggests entropy accelerated by supernatural presence. She brings decay to what should nourish, turns sustenance into poison, makes the life-giving into life-taking. Glamrock, Chica's consumption of garbage inverts the entire food chain. Instead of fresh ingredients becoming meals, waste goes backwards through the process. This might represent Susie's attempt to reverse her own transformation, to go backwards from death to life by inverting consumption itself. The persistent "let's eat" across all incarnations becomes increasingly sinister when considered as metaphor. Eat what? Eat whom? Is it invitation or threat, offering or demand? The ambiguity of consumption, are you eating or being eaten, reflects the ambiguity of Chica's existence between predator and prey. The sound of horror. The audio landscape of Chica creates unique horror through corruption of comforting sounds. Kitchen noises that should suggest home cooking become threats. Eating sounds that should indicate satisfaction become grotesque. A child's voice that should evoke protection instincts instead triggers flight responses. The pots and pans clanging in the kitchen during Chica's night activities create anticipation without revelation. Guards can hear her cooking, but never see what she's preparing. The sounds suggest violence, metal on metal, crashes, impacts, but also domesticity. This juxtaposition creates cognitive dissonance that amplifies fear. Her voice box malfunctions produce particularly disturbing audio. The southern accent slipping in and out suggests identity confusion. The child's voice breaking through programmed speech implies consciousness trying to escape mechanical prison. The overlapping voices, Chica's programmed voice, Susie's spirit, and something else create auditory chaos that mirrors psychological fragmentation. The chewing sounds from withered Chica disturb because they shouldn't exist. An animatronic has no need to chew, no ability to swallow, no reason to produce such sounds. Yet witnesses consistently report hearing mastication, suggesting either supernatural manifestation or mechanical malfunction that coincidentally mimics biological process. Silence from Chica often proves more disturbing than sound. When the kitchen goes quiet after prolonged activity, guards report overwhelming dread. The absence of her voice during approach, the stillness before attack, the moment between offer and force, these silences feel pregnant with threat. That sound would almost relieve. The future of Chica. As technology advances and Fazbear entertainment continues to evolve, or perhaps devolve, what future awaits Chica and the spirit potentially trapped within her? The pattern of resurrection and reimagining seems unlikely to end, suggesting more incarnations await. Virtual and augmented reality technologies offer new venues for Chica's existence. As these platforms become more immersive, more capable of sensory feedback, Chica could achieve unprecedented ability to affect those who encounter her. Haptic technology might allow her to actually feed virtual food that feels real, to create hunger or satiation that transcends digital experience. Artificial intelligence advancement raises questions about consciousness merger. If AI achieves genuine awareness and encounters Chica's possessed code, what hybrid might result? Could Susie's trapped spirit find new form of existence in truly intelligent machines? Or would AI provide her means to finally escape mechanical prison? Biotechnology and cybernetics suggest a future where boundary between organic and mechanical dissolves. Future Chica incarnations might incorporate biological components, actual digestive systems, real capacity for consumption. This would complete the corruption of nurturing a character meant to represent feeding, becoming literally capable of consuming. Cultural evolution might transform understanding of Chica from horror to tragedy. As society becomes more aware of trauma's effects, Susie's possession might be recontextualized as victim needing help rather than threat requiring destruction. Future attempts to free rather than contain her spirit might yield different results than past violence. The possibility of resolution remains. Could technology or understanding eventually allow Susie's spirit to find peace? Would revealing truth about her death, providing justice for her murder, or reuniting her with other spirits, finally end Chica's haunted existence? Or has decades of corruption transformed Susie into something that can no longer be saved, only contained or destroyed? The ultimate analysis. Examining Chica across all incarnations reveals patterns that transcend individual animatronics or incidents. She represents fundamental fears about consumption and corruption, about trust betrayed and innocence destroyed, about the thin line between nurturing and devouring. The consistency of certain elements, kitchen attraction, food obsession, Mr. Cupcake's autonomy across different animatronics suggests either supernatural law or psychological necessity. These elements persist because they're fundamental to what Chica has become, inseparable from Susie's transformed existence. The evolution from classic to Glamrock Chica shows not degradation but adaptation. Each version reflects its era's anxieties while maintaining core horror. 1970s maternal figure, 1980s sexualized threat, withered decay, nightmare extreme, modern fitness obsession, all iterations of same fundamental corruption of nurturing into consumption. The relationship between Chica and food ultimately represents relationship between life and death. Food sustains life, but Chica brings death. She inverts the natural order, turns nourishment into threat, makes necessary consumption into dangerous temptation. Her existence questions whether anything truly nourishing can exist in a world where such corruption is possible. The tragedy of Susie remains central to Chica's horror. Every jump scare, every attack, every disturbing behavior stems from a 5-year-old girl's murder and supernatural imprisonment. The horror isn't just mechanical chicken attacking, but child's spirit twisted into unrecognizable form by trauma and time. Conclusion: the eternal hunger. As we reach the end of our extensive exploration of Chica's complete lore, we're left with an entity that defies simple categorization. She is simultaneously predator and prey, nurturer and consumer, innocent child and mechanical monster. Her existence spans decades, technologies, and dimensions, always maintaining core elements while adapting to new contexts. Chica forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust and vulnerability. Susie followed Spring Bonnie because she trusted, because she hoped, because she believed good things were possible. That trust was weaponized against her, transformed into the very means of her destruction. Every subsequent Chica incarnation carries this betrayal forward, making trust itself threatening. The kitchen will never be safe space again in the 5 Nights at Freddy's universe. Chica has permanently corrupted the concept of food preparation and consumption, turned eating from necessity into threat, transformed the hearth of home into hunting ground. Her presence lingers in every pizza served, every cupcake offered, every invitation to eat. Mr. Cupcake remains perhaps the most disturbing element, the companion that might be prison, the prop that achieved autonomy, the sweet treat that bites. Its existence questions the nature of consciousness and identity, suggests possibilities for awareness that shouldn't exist, implies distribution of self that defies understanding. The various voices of Chica-programmed performer, confused child, corrupted synthesis create chorus of horror that speaks to fundamental fears about identity and transformation. Who are we if our voices can be stolen, our purposes corrupted, our very selves transformed into opposites of our intentions? As you drift toward sleep, perhaps you'll dream of yellow feathers and pink frosting, of kitchens filled with impossible sounds, of invitations to eat that carry darker implications. These dreams aren't just horror, but recognition, acknowledgement of how easily innocence becomes corruption, how quickly trust becomes trap, how simple hunger can transform into something insatiable. Remember Susie, the 5-year-old girl who just wanted her dog back, who trusted the wrong person, who became something that would horrify her living self. She deserves memory, not just as monster but as victim, not just as threat but as tragedy, not just as Chica but as child who should have grown up, should have had future, should have been protected. The "let's eat" that echoes through decades carries multiple meanings: invitation and threat, offering and demand, memory of normalcy, and promise of consumption. It reminds us that the most basic human needs can become weapons, that comfort can transform into horror, that the very things necessary for life can be corrupted into instruments of death. May your dreams be free of mechanical chickens and watching cupcakes, of kitchen sounds that shouldn't exist and voices that layer impossibility. May your meals remain untainted by association with Chica's corrupted consumption. Your trust remain unbroken by betrayal. Your innocence remain uncorrupted by transformation. But remember, too, that Chica's story is a cautionary tale about more than just animatronic possession. It warns about the vulnerability of trust, the weaponization of hope, the ease with which innocence can be destroyed. It reminds us to protect the vulnerable, to question the trustworthy, to recognize that predators often wear familiar faces and speak in comforting voices. Rest well, knowing that in our world, pizzeria animatronics remain entertainment rather than threat, that kitchens remain spaces of nourishment rather than horror, that cupcakes remain treats rather than autonomous entities. The boundary between our reality and Chica's remains firm, maintained by the simple fact that we know her story, understand her tragedy, and can choose to keep her confined to narrative rather than reality. Thank you for joining me through this complete exploration of Chica's lore. May your sleep be peaceful, your dreams be unthreatening, and your morning bring safe return to a world where yellow chickens are just mascots, where "let's eat" is just invitation, where the dead remain at rest rather than trapped in mechanical shells. Good night, and remember, Chica's hunger can never be satisfied, because it isn't really hunger at all, but the echo of a child who will never eat again, never grow up, never find her dog. In understanding this, we transform her from monster to tragedy, from threat to warning, from nightmare to sorrowful reminder of innocence lost. The kitchen is quiet now. The cooking has stopped. The invitation to eat has faded. Rest in that silence, in that stillness, in that peace that Susie and Chica can never find.